Hello, fellow teachers. This is Teaching with Power. And in this video, I'm going to give you insights and ideas to help you teach the story of Jesus on the road to Emmaus with relevancy and impact. Now, as you're watching, if you feel this video is helping you in any way, I encourage you to hit the like and subscribe buttons down below, which will cause the channel to grow and help other teachers just like you. This is insight number 1 for the week of June 24th to June 30th in the Come Follow Me manual, and I usually make about 2 to 3 videos per week. Quick note, you may wonder why I don't have more this week on the resurrection of Christ. And the reason is because I already did a video on that topic back in April for Easter. So if you would like my thoughts on that for this week's lesson, then click on this link in the upper right-hand corner of your screen and it will take you to that video. And also, I'll put a link to it in the description below. So let's get started. For the icebreaker, there's a fun little YouTube video that you could use to introduce one of the ideas behind this lesson. And I'm not sure about copyright issues, so I'm not going to include it, but I can certainly provide you with a link and encourage you to go watch it to see if it's something that you might want to use. I'll put the link down in the video description below, and if you've never seen it, you may want to go watch it now before I talk about it and ruin it for you. But it's called the awareness test. And I believe it's a commercial, and what you have is a bunch of people throwing a basketball around, and they ask you to count how many times the ball is passed. So you watch it, and you come up with a number hoping that you get it right. Then they tell you the answer. But then they say, did you see the moonwalking bear? And I remember when I first watched this saying, what do you mean a moonwalking bear? It totally got me. And so they rewind the tape, and sure enough, when you're looking for it, right in the middle of the ball being passed, a guy walks out in a bear costume and starts dancing. And you just can't believe that you missed it the first time. And the point is, it's easy to miss things that you aren't looking for. So after showing that little video, you can transition to the scriptures by saying, today we'll take a look at a story about 2 men who were walking the road from Jerusalem to their village called Emmaus after the crucifixion of the Savior. What were they not aware of in Luke 24:13 through 16? And they're not aware that Jesus is walking with them. Jesus has been resurrected and they don't realize it yet. The scriptures say that their eyes were holden that they should not know him. And there's a double meaning in this. One, they don't recognize him physically, but also they don't recognize him spiritually either. They don't recognize, see, or understand his role as the Messiah, and that he had come not to liberate them from Romans, but from sin and death. So continue with the story by asking, as we read Luke 24:17 through 25, how would you describe the way these 2 men are feeling at this time? Then read those verses together, and they should come up with the word sad in verse 17. That's the easy one. But as you read the other verses, some other emotions are suggested or implied. For example, verse 21, where Cleopas says, but we trusted, which means we hoped, that it had been he which should have redeemed Israel. If your students don't catch that phrase, maybe you could point it out to them and ask what that suggests about their feelings. And I believe it suggests that they're confused, in despair, discouraged, disillusioned. This man who they believed would be their liberator, their leader, the very Son of God, is now gone. He's been killed. Things have not turned out the way that they expected. They might pick up the word astonished in verse 22, again suggesting their confusion as to the meaning of all these things they've experienced and heard. And then Jesus is going to add an emotion for us in verse 25, slow of heart to believe. They're doubtful. They don't understand what the prophets have taught about Christ's mission or the meaning of his body being gone from the tomb and the women reporting the visions of angels. And here I would pause and say, let's liken the scriptures to ourselves. Can you relate to these two? Have you ever felt those same emotions? Sad, confused, discouraged about things in your life that have not turned out the way that you hoped or expected they would? Doubtful? And hopefully they can relate. Maybe we're also sad about losing a loved one and are doubting the reality of the resurrection. Maybe our lives aren't turning out the way we thought they would. Our marriage, our career, our health. Maybe we're confused about life and the doctrines of the gospel, not sure how they relate or if they're true at all. We hope certain things, but then, just like for these 2 disciples, the current evidence suggests otherwise. And to move on with your lesson, you could say, when we feel this way, this story will teach us some important things that we should know and do. 1, what is the thing that they are not aware of as they speak to this stranger, and what does that teach us? And they should come up with something like, Jesus was with them and they didn't realize it. Does that hold true for us as well? I believe it does. And I would be sure to make the point that Jesus walks with us even though we may not always realize it. You could cross-reference them to Matthew 28:20, where Jesus promises his disciples that I am with you always, even unto the end of the world. Jesus promises all those who believe in him that he will be with them. Now, that may not necessarily mean physically and literally, but he promises us some measure of his presence, his love, and his Spirit to always be with us. Now, here you move on by saying, spoiler alert, by the end of this story, they are going to recognize that it's Jesus. But what helped them to come to this realization? And this will teach us what we can do to also recognize his presence in our lives. Then as a teacher, read to them slowly and carefully verses 26 through 35. What will they hopefully find? I see at least three things. One, the Scriptures. In verse 27, Jesus starts teaching them things about himself from the Old Testament. And in verse 32, they describe how they felt. Did not our heart burn within us while he talked with us by the way, and while he opened to us the Scriptures? And as somebody who loves the Scriptures deeply, this is my favorite thought from this whole story. We recognize the Savior's presence as we open the Scriptures and study them. I like to draw a line between those two opens. It's a cool connection. When I open the Scriptures, the eyes of my spirit are opened to the presence and reality of Jesus Christ. And our hearts will burn within us, or we'll feel something that will let us know that he's there. And I suggest that you testify of that right there, if you feel that way about the Scriptures, and I hope you do. And I want you to know that I know that the Scriptures have power. That's why I call this channel Teaching with Power. The power in Teaching with Power is not from the insights or the ideas or from me. The power is in the Scriptures themselves and in the Spirit that testifies of their truth as you study them. Jesus Christ is on every single page of the Scriptures. Now, some pages he's a little harder to find, but he's there. And the more you study them, the more you will know about him, and the more you will recognize his company as you walk your road back to your eternal home. Number 2, the sacrament. In verse 30, it says he took bread and blessed it and brake and gave it to them. And in verse 35, this idea is echoed with, he was known of them in breaking of bread. We too come to know the Savior and recognize his presence as we partake of the sacrament. And again, I suggest you simply testify of the power of the sacrament to bring us closer to Jesus Christ. One of the things that helps me to feel the presence of the Savior during the sacrament is just looking at the sacrament table. There is symbolism in the white sheet being draped over the emblems of the sacrament. It's intended to look like the Savior's body underneath the sheet, helping me to remember the sacrifice that he made for me. Third, this one isn't as obvious, and maybe I'm stretching it a little, but I love verses 28 through 29. When they get to their home, the Scriptures say that Jesus made as though he would have gone further. And I might ask my students, why do you think Jesus acted as if he would go further? And I'm not sure what they'll say to that, but it's a good question. And I think it's because he wants them to invite him in, but like a good guest, he's not going to force his way into their home. And they do. They constrain him and say, abide with us. And how does he respond to their request? He went in to tarry with them. He graciously accepts their invitation. I believe that it's the same with us. Jesus will not force his way into our lives. We need to invite him in. And how do we do that? Through prayer. Through prayer, we can request that he abide with us. And what will he do in response? He'll tarry with us. It reminds me of one of my favorite hymns, Abide With Me. And a great cross-reference here that you could take them to is Revelation 3:20, where it says, Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If any man hear my voice and open the door, I will come into him and will sup with him, and he with me. So what will help me to recognize the presence of the Savior in my life? Studying the Scriptures, partaking of the sacrament thoughtfully, and praying for him to abide with me. And to really sink these principles deep into their hearts, here I would ask, would anyone be willing to share a time when one of these things has helped you to feel and know that Jesus was with you? When have you felt the Savior walking beside you? And if you've created the right environment, I'm confident that there will be individuals that will share. But I also suggest that you have an experience of your own to share as well. Then conclude with your testimony. Assure them that Christ is with them always, even if they don't recognize it. Promise them that if they'll study the Scriptures, partake of the sacrament thoughtfully, and invite Christ into their lives through prayer, that their eyes will be opened and their hearts will burn within them. And you might also add the promise that one day they actually will behold the resurrected Savior himself, in the flesh, in reality and not just in spirit, and experience the same joy that the early disciples of Christ did as they beheld their resurrected Lord. Such a great story. Well, before I conclude, I just wanted to take a moment to thank all of you that have watched and subscribed and are using these videos to help you in your teaching. This past week, the channel passed the 1,000 subscribers mark, which is super exciting and humbling for me. To reach that mark in only 2 months has surpassed my expectations. I'm so grateful for you as an audience, and I feel privileged to be a part of your lesson preparation and study of the Scriptures. I love teaching the Scriptures, and this channel has given me a way to expand my classroom larger than I ever thought possible. All right then, keep studying and keep teaching with power.